It is a new podcast, Draft to Deadline, Inside the Reporter's Notebook. I am your host, Brian Dorman. It's great to be with you. I'm so glad to see you for another episode. Today's topic is a tough one, and I'll be very honest with you. I'm going through some stuff in my personal life right now that makes today really emotional, and I probably should be anywhere but in this podcast room, especially talking about this topic. But it's too important to put off any longer. We're in the month of October. As you know, September is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, which was the whole catalyst of this story, Surviving Suicide, to begin with. I'm excited to share this with you, though, this interview with Kelsey Igason. It is an interview that is unedited. You will hear the entire interview that we had that is the complete version as Kelsey walks us through childhood trauma, addiction, her own suicide attempt, and now life on the other side of that, and how she deals with those cravings of addiction still to this day, and what her life looks like 8 years removed from her suicide attempt. So I want to jump right into my interview with Kelsey, and on the back end of it, we'll chat with some of my takeaways from that interview that day. All right, I just want to start with just your story. Tell me how you were feeling and how it led up to the overwhelming sense of really not wanting to be here anymore.
Well, the night it happened, it was like I exploded. You know, it was like a decades of trauma, right? Just different things that had happened, different experiences, struggling with mental health, but ignoring it, like thinking I'm stronger than it, you know, using life to cope. So, I have a good job at a hospital, you know, I'm fine. Or I am married, right? Like I'm doing good. And I was getting by for a really long time, holding on by a thread. So the night it happened, it was just like I cracked. And there was, the floodgates opened, and my best solution to escape the pain and to solve all my problems was to attempt suicide.
This was November.
It was in April.
April, what was the date?
April 21st, 2017.
April 21st, 2017. Yeah. And at that point, you have how many children?
I had two.
And how old were they at the time?
One was 7 and one was 3, I think.
So walk me through what you're thinking in that moment, because in that moment, I mean, you have 2 children, you have a husband.
Right. I was in the garage. I was struggling with addiction. That night I was sober, but I had been struggling for the last 6 months in a relapse. And I had so much shame for relapsing. I felt like the number one lie that I believed that ultimately led to the suicide was that my kids would be better off without a mom like me. I felt like I had become the person in their lives that I was trying to protect them from. You know, what kind of mom struggles with addiction? What kind of mom chooses, you know, addiction over her kids? You know, all those thoughts, the depression, you know, just feeling like everybody would be better off without someone like me in their lives, because all I'm doing is failing. And it was that lie that ultimately, like, I believed it. I thought, you know what, yeah, like they would be better off without me. And it would be better for them not to know me than to know me as this person. I truly felt like I had become the very person that I protected them from. And it's crazy to think that as a young girl, my dream was to be a mom. But at the rock bottom of depression, the one thing that I loved the most was also my reason for justifying, you know, not being alive. And there's just something so heavy about that. Mm-hmm. You know, that depression can take our purpose and the things we love, and it can lie to us in such a profound way, and we can be I just picture like I was piled on top of all of these, trauma, my own decisions, like it was just, over the years it was piling up. It probably started piling, in 7th and 8th grade, maybe even in elementary school, but all these things started stacking, and I didn't, let something stack and look at it and go, I'm going to place this here and solve this, right? Like that emotional coping or that problem solving. I did sports. I got good grades. Nothing was solved. It was just all like fit in together. And I feel like at that moment, all of those things just crushed me. But I really I've learned through mental health therapy and through taking medications and changing my life that we as parents or we as a community, we have to start looking at that pile sooner. We can't just assume the kids they're doing great, like they're getting good grades, because you can have all those things and you can, because I was a perfectionist, I presented well. Even in my addiction, I didn't look like the stereotypical addict. I wasn't, I was a mom. I was taking my kids to school. I could survive with a straight face, but inside I was like burning alive. My husband saw it. There were days it was so hard for me to get up, but I realized that I should have started dealing with that pile as soon as I recognized that one was forming. Yeah.
Walk me through your journey of addiction and recovery. What is it that you were addicted to? When did that begin, and how have you dealt with that? How long have you been sober?
I've been sober for 8 years. So the night of my suicide attempt is also my first night sober. I started struggling with addiction in high school. It's really crazy because, I was in high school in the early 2000s, and addiction it was still taught that it was a choice, and, it only happened to people who don't care about themselves, and it wasn't taught as a disease, that has craving, and it wasn't, I don't even know if it was in the DSM yet, as a substance use disorder, seen as a mental health disorder. So when I started struggling, I was an athlete. I was struggling with mental health in 7th and 8th grade, especially around puberty years, which I feel like is really typical. Having anxiety and depression, but just kind of mom not knowing what to do. I would get really upset. I wouldn't want to go to school because I would be anxious, and then my anxiety would build up and I would be angry. And so, I just kept doing more sports and getting more involved. I was having concussions because I was a gymnast and didn't know, because back then we didn't even, you didn't get diagnosed a concussion unless you passed out or you were unconscious. So I think that was playing a part, right? When you look at a trauma inventory, you want to look at everything: physical, mental, emotional, social, behavioral. So, but from the outside looking in, it looked like I had the perfect life. That's what I was told so much when I came out with my addiction, was I thought you had the perfect life. And it's that lie that if everything's perfect, you don't struggle. Perfect lives don't have mental health struggles, right? Seemingly perfect lives. And it's just such a lie. And so when I was 16, I started drinking first, and then I started smoking pot. And then when I was 16, I was introduced to cocaine at a party, at a house. And just peer pressure, girls were doing it, and I was like, oh, I want to try, I want to fit in. Curiosity, right? I'm fun, I like to have fun, and I think sometimes that can it creates a curiosity where you're willing to try things. And so I tried it and didn't try it thinking I could become an addict, because in my mind I'm like, well, only bad people become addicts. I'm a good person. So yeah, I tried it, and it within 4 months I knew I was addicted. I had no idea what craving was. We weren't taught, we had maybe DARE assemblies, but there wasn't a lot of education on it. And I remember I was at my high school and I was looking on the floor of my car for like crumbs of cocaine. And I was like, I just had this moment where I was like, what is going on? Why do I feel this way? And I didn't get dressed in the morning. I was coming in pajamas. I had a teacher notice that I was changing. I went from a perfectionist to like, just didn't even care. I would come with my hair barely brushed, and I knew something was wrong. Like, I was looking at my peers and I'm like, no one else is, like, everyone's still going to class. Like, all I can think about is how to get more. So I went to my mom and I said, Mom, I think I'm addicted to drugs. And I asked for help at 16. And I wish I could say it was like this moment where everyone was like, oh my gosh, thank you for coming. No, it was like devastating. Like, I dropped a bomb and there was so much shame, my parents felt a lot of shame for having an addict as a daughter, because they still had that old school belief that it's a moral failing and that they failed. And back then we had no treatment centers here. There was not one, not a single adolescent treatment center. And even for like mental health, not very much. And so I got sent to LA, where they found one over there. I think there was only one at that time, maybe two. And I did 60 days. And I just remember like sitting in the rehab and they were like, okay, you have a disease and you'll have it forever and you can never use another substance again. Because if you use a substance, it will trigger the disease and, you'll be in a relapse. And I remember sitting there thinking, I'm not going to make it to 30. I am 16 years old and you're telling me I can never have a drink or a drug or anything again. And like in my mind, I was like, I'm never going to make it out of this alive. And I just remember feeling like so overwhelmed, but also like, I'm going to try. Like, I was like, I'm strong. Like, I'm going to try. And I would come home and I would get, I went to AA. I was the only 16-year-old in AA. I didn't go to school. Like, I stayed home and did school to try to like mitigate exposure to like temptation. I would get, like 60 or 90 days as a 16-year-old, and then I would relapse and I would usually run away with friends. But it was like the darkest, loneliest time of my life. It was so hard to be alone at 16 in sobriety, and be so afraid that I was going to essentially kill myself with drugs and alcohol if I didn't stop. And a lot of my friends were like in their 20s and 30s because they were in recovery. Like, I was getting sober with my friends' moms that I went to high school with. And I would hang out with their moms instead of them because I needed to stay sober. And it was really hard. It was really hard. So I struggled on and off for 10 years. I would get, a few months and then I would relapse. My addiction, the running away was so bad for my family that the only treatment center we had was in the juvenile hall. And they put me in the juvenile hall for 6 months in the treatment center there because they were so desperate to get me help. And that was like so traumatic. That was so hard. It's hard to be alone in a jail cell, as a 17, 18-year-old. But that time in there forced me to be with myself. And I really do think, like, in the long run, it saved my life because I went where I couldn't even go a day in my own head to, like, waking up in a tiny little box and I had no choice but to be with myself. And there were days like I thought I was gonna die. Like, how am I gonna get out of here? And then once I was able to accept, like, I have to do this for 6 months, I learned so much about my own mind. Like, I learned about myself, and I learned to love myself alone in that box. It was really, really hard. You know, I really, really wanted to be at home, and I really, really wanted to be with my family. But I told myself, well, if I'm going to be here, I'm going to figure it out. And I read hundreds of books, and I studied different faiths, and I tried to find the answer that was going to save my life in there. But when I got out, I was really traumatized. It was just really traumatizing, just because you don't have a lot of people to talk to, and, you know, you're getting treatment, but it's like 3 hours a day, and the other hours you're alone, you know. And so I just got out, and I just went crazy, and I was just doing drugs and hanging out in bad parts of town. You know, when you go from being like a cheerleader to like juvenile hall, you lose like all of your friends. And when you come out as an addict, you know, people think you're a bad kid. And so I was just really isolated. And I took on that identity. I started identifying as, you know, a drug addict, and that I wasn't worthy of a certain kind of life. And I got pregnant at 19, and I think that was the first time in a long time I felt like, you know, maybe there was like a God, right? And like I had a purpose, because I always wanted to be a mom, and I was pregnant, and I was like, maybe this is it. Like, maybe I'm supposed to do this. And I had my son, and I stayed sober, and I stayed sober for many years, and I changed my life, and I became a phlebotomist, and I started working at the children's hospital. But there was always like, the pile was still there, but it was like I found a purpose in a child, and that's not a good enough purpose. I learned in my recovery, the purpose has to be for me. Like, I have to want to be sober, and I have to want to change my life. And not only that, but I have to deal with the pile. You know, I can't just get sober and expect the pile to solve itself. And I think I had this idea of like, okay, like, I have a kid, I can do it. And it wasn't until I had my second son, I got married, I met my husband when my son was 2, and I got married, and we had another baby, and then I got postpartum depression, but I didn't know what it was. We had, you know, my oldest son was going through we were going through a custody case, and that was very hard. And I had a baby, and I had postpartum depression, and I remember thinking like, I can't bond with this baby. Like, I was like, why don't I love this baby as much as I love my first son? And I felt so ashamed, and I did not want to tell anyone that. I was so scared if I told the doctor, they would think I was a bad mom. But I was 24, you know, I didn't know. And I battled that for months. And then ultimately, that was in 2014. And then in 2016 is when I relapsed end of 2016 for 6 months. So it was.
And at that point, you were sober for how long? It was quite a stretch.
I had gotten sober from 19 to 21. And then, so in recovery, they want you 100% abstinent. That's technically sober. But at 21, I started drinking because I thought, I'm 21, I've been sober for 3 years, I'm not an alcoholic, like, I'll be fine. So I drank in that time period. So but drugs I hadn't used for a long time. But I was really proud, you know, I did consider that sober at that time, because I was like, wow, like, I've really changed my life. But it was through that process I learned, like, I truly am an addict. Like, I cannot take any mind-altering substances. And not only that, I can't live my life hanging on by a thread. it's too fragile. Like struggling with mental health, I can't just get by. Like I truly have to solve problems and learn skills and thrive, because struggling with addiction is already hard. You know, it's a daily battle. You have to be very disciplined. You have to stick to routines, and so just that alone, you know, in order for me to live a really healthy life with just addiction, I have to be very on top of all of what's going on in my life. You know, I have to be in therapy. If I take a break from therapy, I do check-ins. But when I got sober and I found my therapist, I did the 12 steps and then in AA, and then I found my therapist. You know, it took me like almost 3 years of every day going to dig through that pile and start to look at everything and place it in a healed pile, right? Like I picture my head was like a filing cabinet and all the files were just thrown out, and I started putting them away. And now that I've gone through trauma therapy and learned emotional coping, now those experiences I don't consider them to be trauma. I consider them to be wisdom, right? Like they were traumatic experiences, but now I understand them and I've accepted them, and I use them to like help my children or help somebody, and it's given me empathy, compassion, and it's literally made me the kind of person who is curious and who loves all people. I want to know people. I want to know their story. I want to listen to them. I want them to know they're not alone. And it's crazy to think that my depression and my addiction made me the opposite, an angry, shut off, closed, judgmental person, because I was so scared of myself that I was scared of you. And recovery has literally, it's like I've been reborn, you know.
So we're at 21 years old, right? You have a husband, you have 2 kids, a baby, and you have now fallen back into addiction for 6 months, and then you get sober again.
Yes, so at 21 I started drinking, then when I was 26, I relapsed for 6 months.
Got it.
Yeah, it was like October to April.
Yeah, and that was the year, that was
Yeah.
April.
Yeah.
So at that point, wow, so we're all caught up.
Yeah.
So since that day, you haven't drank at all?
Yeah, I've had
nothing to
no
drink,
mind-altering substances at all.
When you relapse each time, was it always alcohol and cocaine?
Yeah, it was usually like I would drink and then someone would have cocaine or I would get it. And then I was considered like a binge user. So I would just use for like a week and then I would stop and then I would it's kind of the cycle when I was 16. I would use for a week, stop for 3 months, use for a week, and I would just cycle through that.
How'd your husband feel about this? Did he ever struggle with addiction? Was he able to relate to you at all, or was this really a struggle for him?
So I met my husband when I was 15. We had the same friends. He knew me before my addiction. So I feel like that strengthened our relationship because he truly, like, he knew my brother like in 7th grade. So I feel like he knew who I was. My husband literally hated drugs in high school because he had survived his own experiences with like family members struggling. So he was the opposite, where he saw it and he didn't want to be around it. So it was a surprise, I think, to many people when we started dating because we were opposites on that stance. But when we started dating, I was sober and he was in nursing school and I was working at a hospital, and we really felt like his experience in the military was like we could relate, because with my juvenile hall, like we really related in the sense of like what that was like for him. And so we had a lot in common, but my husband knew, and when we started dating, I had written him a letter and I had said, like, this is what my addiction looks like, because I wanted him to have all the facts. So when he was dating me, he could make a decision if I really was somebody he wanted to pursue and marry, because I never wanted to be somebody in someone's life. I didn't want to be that person, right? That monster. Like, I was so worried about being a person that would hurt someone else, and I knew my addiction could be so selfish. And when he had read that letter, he said, "Who told you these things about yourself? Like, this is not who you are." But that identity, I had just taken that on. But he did, consider it, and he said, "I'm not afraid of this." So my husband had a lot of empathy and compassion because he had his own traumas growing up. His life wasn't easy, and so he had the ability to see potential in me. I think that no one had ever seen in me. Like, he believed in me, and it made me believe in myself, because I'm like, why do you believe in me so much? And he would just always tell me what I was instead of what I wasn't. So when I relapsed, it was scary. He was upset. He was, just before my suicide, he was in college, finishing nursing school. We were on state assistant, like welfare and food stamps, trying to get through. I was not working. I had lost my job, and we were literally trying to find a treatment center, but we knew no one. Like, we did not even know who to call. And so we saw the signs. Like, the signs were there. He was trying so hard. But it was just like one of those things where it was like things were just piling up. And we were young. We just didn't know what to do. But he went through a lot.
Yeah. So it sounds like he's never used drugs.
Never. I mean, he drank, and like the typical, like, tried smoking pot, but like nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing like me.
It sounds like he really saved you more ways than just April.
Yeah, he did. I think that he's taught me the power of believing in someone. People already know what they're not. They already know where they're falling short, but people don't always hear where they're going right. And even like in the middle of rock bottom, like, you can still be doing some things right and still have something to hold on to. And I think that's what he's taught me, is just how to like relentlessly believe in people.
Walk me through that day in April. So you don't want to be here anymore, and you still are. And so what happened? Because I understand your husband found you. Walk me through kind of what had happened that day in April.
So I don't remember. I had a head injury, so I don't remember the actual date. I do remember the night. So that night, Tim was really upset. He was like, "I'm really tired. Like, we have to do something. We have to get you help." And he basically was like, "You need to find treatment, or you have to move out. You have to leave." And I was like, "Okay." And so that night, I was just like, I was racing thoughts, like, how am I going to get out of this? How am I going to get sober? Like, how am I going to pull myself up? Like, shame, just going through like all the emotions of feeling like I'm failing. And I ended up it just like I cracked. Like, it's the best way I can describe it, is I just was like, okay, like I don't want to be here. Like, I cannot do this. I'm ruining everyone's lives. Like, I'm ruining Tim's life. I'm ruining the kids' lives. I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror. I didn't even recognize myself. I never wanted to be a mom who struggled with addiction. The shame that I carried for so long for that, it's hard to put into words, but I never ever wanted to be that kind of mom. And no one does, right? Like, no one says, when I grow up, I want to ruin my kids' lives. So it was that lie, like, they would be better off without me. They deserve a totally different life. So I had climbed to the top of, we're not supposed to like, yeah, never mind. Okay, we're not gonna talk about that. So yeah, anyways, I forget, yeah. I attempted, and then my husband found me. So he saw me on the side of the house, and he had heard me, and I had a cut in my head. I was bleeding, and then my leg was broken. And so he performed, because he was in the military, combat life-saving skills, and he called 911. And I went downtown to our level 1 trauma. So yeah, that was really hard.
Walk me through, because I understand this and relate to this. There's a moment where you don't want to be here anymore, and then you're like, damn, that didn't work.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because I felt that way too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's so weird.
That's not the goal.
Yeah.
And I know it's weird to say it that way, but
Yeah.
how did you feel being rescued and saved in that moment?
So at the hospital, when I got to the trauma, I remember I was in the trauma bay, and I was like, I did this to myself. Like, this is my fault. And I was just like taking all this accountability, and they were like, we need to untie your leg. And I was like, I'll do it. This is my fault. Like, I kept saying that. And then I remember, I don't remember. And then the next morning, I think it was the next morning, I don't even remember, however many days it was, I woke up in the hospital, and I remember I immediately was like, I'm such a disappointment. Like, that was my first thought. Like, I couldn't even protect my kids from me. I'm like, this is like, that was the only thought, is I'm such a disappointment. And I had no idea what happened. Like, I didn't know I didn't know fully where I was at, what was happening. And I just remember thinking that my first thought was, you are such a disappointment. Like, how could you do this? And then my next thought was my kids. And I don't know, it was just,
It's shame and guilt and
yeah,
disappointment all over again.
so much shame. Like, just not worthy of even a thought. Like, I'm just nothing. Like, what kind of person am I? It's really hard. It's really hard to put into words, because the shame was so overpowering.
Because you're already so shameful to be an addict and be a wife and a mom, and now you are an addict, a wife and a mom, and now a suicide attempt survivor.
Yeah. You just don't feel like you are anything. You just feel total worthlessness. Like, it just felt like the world would be better off without someone like me in it.
How did you get to that point? So here we are. You survived this attempt to really just changing your life and saying, was that your breaking point where you just said, I am not going to do this anymore?
It was the hospital staff. I was so desperate for help. I was so desperate. Like, even in my attempt, I was so desperate. My attempt was my solution. It was the only way I knew. Like, I always say, rock bottom for me was realizing I couldn't escape the pain of my life, high or sober. And so my next best solution was not being here. I was just trying to find a way out of the hell that I had created, that my addiction had created, that trauma created. And I was at the hospital, and it was the hospital staff because I had a brain injury, so they did a brain injury assessment on me, and they started asking about, like, have you ever hit your head? Have you ever had a concussion before this? And I was like, I mean, yeah, I lived a high-risk life. And so that was a turning point for me, because I had a lot of questions as a kid, like why I struggled so much and why sometimes things were harder for me, even just learning or different things I struggled with. And so when we did my trauma inventory, they included concussions. And that was like a huge turning point for me in identity, right? Because I was able to start putting pieces back together and go, okay, like, yeah, I did have these selfish moments. I did have this selfishness and self-centered and addiction, but I also had, maybe this missing piece of brain injury, and maybe like this trauma was hard, and
give you some answers.
yes, like I was starting to put the puzzle piece together. One thing I was really good at was, I want to say good. One skill I had because I went into addiction early was I was fully aware of the selfishness of my addiction to a point where it was my identity. Whereas I didn't have as many skills in identifying emotional coping or trauma or brain, putting those pieces together where it kind of explains other things that I struggled with. And so sitting there and putting it all together, it was like I was finally able to have solutions to problems I couldn't otherwise fix, because the 12 steps, they solve your addiction behavior, but there's a mental health side, and that's a totally different journey. And that's where treatment, outpatient mental health, and inpatient treatment comes in. Like, it's not just about your addiction. It is about your mental health. It is about your trauma. And I had never dove deep enough into that in my adulthood to really understand it. And so for the first time, I kind of tabled the addiction and the 12 steps, and I really dug into the mental health side and the brain injury side. And it was like I had all these math equations, but I didn't know whether I was like supposed to add, subtract, multiply, or divide the numbers. I just had numbers. And then once I started looking at the brain injury and the trauma inventory and the mental health side, I knew what to do. It gave me what I need to solve them and start answering my problems. So, and then there's a spiritual side, right, to addiction. And the chaplain came in, and I shared with her like experiences that I had had and moments I wasn't sure, like if they were God or, was I just a drug addict? And she looked at me and she said, "You have spent your whole life thinking you're just a drug addict and you're worthless." And she's like, "What if you left here and you just tried to believe that there is a God and he calls you his daughter and he loves you and that you're worthy of love and a good life?" And I just looked at her and I said, "Okay, I'm going to try." And every day for the last 8 years, I wake up and I tell myself that I'm a daughter to God and he loves me. And I believed it. And it was in that belief that all of those lies, right, that your kids would be better off without you, that identity, I reshaped my identity around my healing and less about my failures and my trauma.
Talk to me about life on the other side. So you had a boy?
3
after?
boys.
Oh,
Yes, I had a boy, yeah.
You had a boy.
2018, yeah.
Yeah. So then you had a son, and then you had, of course, Willow,
Yeah.
and now you have a puppy.
Yeah.
When you sit now and you reflect back and think about all that has happened, that your son that would not be here, Willow wouldn't be here, your puppy may or may not be here, but when you look back on what life has been like and all that you would have missed out on, what does that look like?
I think about that every time, when my kids say, "I love you." Every time one of my kids says, "Mom, I love you," I think about it. Think about how there's a part of me that goes, "Oh, I don't deserve that. I've made so many mistakes," right? There's always that little part of me that remembers that feeling. But then I look at them and I think, like, I'm just really grateful. I think about what it's taken to get where I'm at today, how hard I've had to work and how much accountability I've had to take. And it's really hard. And that makes me sad because I know there's people that are struggling And I wish I could tell them it's really easy and you're going to get your life back. But it was a lot of hard work. It was a lot of, I broke my leg and there were days I crawled on the floor to take care of the kids. I had to have accountability for being a mom who struggled with addiction, and I had to face a lot of stuff. But I think about where I'm at today, and it was worth it. And every time, especially my oldest son, like, he wants to be a psychologist and he wants to help people, and he's done his own mental health treatment, and he's 15, and my husband has gone to therapy. Like, my autistic son does his own therapy. Like, that moment changed everything. Like, we recreated our family legacy. We are a family now that believes in mental health. We have conversations around it with our young children. We are ending the stigma around medication. Like, we are a family who loves everyone in our community. Like, if I could go back and tell myself that if you go, as a teenager, if you go now and you get help, like, it's going to change generations in your family, I wouldn't have believed it. I would have said, but how? How can that be? But I've realized through my recovery that, like, it's not just about me. It's about all of the people who come into your life and your kids and the next generation. It changes them to watch you go to therapy and to have these open discussions. It's incredible to watch how that choice to address my mental health, how it's bled into my entire family.
Your family must be so proud of you.
Yeah, I think they are, yeah.
Yeah, your parents who stuck by you.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're still in therapy now?
Yes,
Yeah.
I do check in. So, like, I'm at a as needed. So I will call her and say, hey, like, I have some stuff that's piled up. Let's work through it. But yeah, I'm always.
I'm curious, did you ever crave a drink or cocaine?
I did I craved for years when I first got sober. It was, for me, it was hard. I fought it. I had very heavy cravings.
When something bad happens, right?
Yeah.
You turn to that, and
Yes.
bad things happen all the time.
Yeah. When I was young, I love that you asked that. That is so cool, because when I was young, I used to think if I had a craving that my recovery wasn't strong, that something was wrong with me. I was close to a relapse and I would spiral. But now that I'm older, I have learned that craving is part of the disease. It's my brain. And when I have a craving to me now, sometimes, like, I'll be driving and someone's, like, smoking weed, at the intersection, and I'll go, oh, that looks so good. Remember those days? Or a song will play. But it's just a reminder to me that I will always be an addict. And what it used to make me uncomfortable, but now I just silently inside just go, oh, it's so good to remember that I am one decision away from going back. And I think in a way it honors my children and my family to know that cravings still happen, because it allows me to never forget where I came from. And that keeps me really grounded. So yeah, I do have them, but they don't define me. I just know, like, that's part of my brain chemistry and my mental health. And, sometimes it alerts me, like, hey, maybe I need to deal with this. Call therapist and have a chat. But if anything, it's just who I am.
Do you ever drop in on meetings still?
Oh, yeah. I try to go to a meeting once a week.
Wow.
But yeah, I would probably go more if I wasn't as busy with my kids, but definitely once a week I like to go. And it just reminds me my purpose, like, that I'm an alcoholic, and my purpose is to help an alcoholic who still suffers.
I want to end with this. I know that I am confident that you sharing your story will save lives. And there's people that are watching this right now who feel how you felt in April. And I want to know what you want to say to them. What is your message to the person that felt like you felt at that darkest moment?
My message to them is that your pain has purpose, that your identity isn't in your pain. You are not your depression. You're not the bad things that have happened or the bad things that you've done. You have a purpose on this earth, and it's deeply rooted in pain that's healed. You know, when you heal and you face the things that hurt you, that pain will turn to wisdom, and you will help a lot of people. The world doesn't need perfect people to make it a better place. The world needs healed people who share and who love. It's in our deepest pain that we find our greatest purpose. So please don't give up. Get help. There's people who will love you. But yeah, you have a purpose.
If you felt like you heard that message before that day in April, do you think it would have helped you?
Yeah, I think if I just had someone say, like, this is the way out. This is the way through. The only way out is through, but I'm going to hold your hand, and we're going to get through this, and you're going to help a lot of people. I think having a purpose, knowing I had a purpose, would have really helped.
Can you believe that interview with Kelsey? I just found it to be so emotional and so profound. I also sat down with her friend Samantha Lambert for the story that aired on television. Samantha lost her dad, John, to suicide. And if you search right now, yourcentralvalley.com and search surviving suicide, I'd like for you to be able to hear Samantha's interview as well. Even though we don't have the complete interview to share with you, I really wanted you to hear Kelsey's. And I really appreciate Kelsey being so open, so vulnerable to share really her entire life story. And I think it's one that we all can really learn something from. I really found a takeaway of her story to be the fact that she still has cravings in her addiction today. And that when she recognizes that she is having a craving, she changes that thought, changes that action into something else. And I think that a lot of us who have dealt with addiction or have family members who have dealt with addiction can relate to that. And as soon as that moment pops in your mind to drink, use drugs, gamble, to think about something else, to do something else, to get up and move in a different direction, I think was a really big takeaway. The stories of suicide and overcoming suicide just are really personal to me. I did a story in Tulsa, Oklahoma with a school principal who lost her son, Jameson, to suicide. And in South Bend, Indiana, I did a story with a family 1 year out from the loss of their son, Christian. And the stories, they stick with you. I was recently asked, why do you do the stories that you do? From fentanyl to human trafficking to suicide prevention, some of the really tough stuff, those who have lost someone to a drunk driver. And my response to that was the fact that some of these are still taboo topics today, or difficult to talk about, and ones that you don't hear on television very often, or in a space like this in a podcast, which has gotten, obviously in this space, a podcast has gotten more and more common, which I'm so happy to see us talking more today in 2025 about mental health, depression, suicide. But in television, we still don't talk about it very much. And so to be able to share Samantha and Kelsey's stories on TV just always mean a lot to me personally. And then being able to share with you the full unedited version of the interview so that you can hear everything that Kelsey had to say means a lot to me too. So surviving suicide, it is the latest story that I've worked on, the latest project. It is obviously the latest topic of this podcast, Draft to Deadline, Inside the Reporter's Notebook. I have a couple of more really exciting projects that I'm working on right now that will take us through the end of this year. And I cannot wait to see you again here in the podcast room as we continue this new podcast, Draft to Deadline, Inside the Reporter's Notebook, having meaningful conversations about the stories that I'm able to share with you on TV.